What's up everybody, Jeff here, and I'm extremely excited because we just got a new book for The Other Side. The newest expansion is called Beyond the Other Side, and just like with most of Wyrd's book releases, we got a whole bunch of new looks at models, we got to check out a bunch of new rules, and we got a bunch of new lore, which of course is my favorite part of the new books. Now, The Other Side is a really cool game. I'm a huge fan of it, and if you haven't checked it out before, then check out this video I did to sort of help people get into the game. I definitely recommend checking it out. There's a free vassal module, so if you just want to jump in and kind of poke around and give the rules a shot, then you can do it there for nothing. But Beyond the Other Side is extremely exciting for me because this is the launch of two brand new factions to the game that we've kind of known about for a while now and have been a long time coming, but we're finally getting to see them on the table. Those factions are the Common and the Three Kingdoms. If you're not familiar, the Common are kind of the Oni from a different dimension. They're sort of monsters and creatures from Eastern mythology, and you might have seen them before if you've ever seen Asami and her crew. Most of the stuff in her crew that she can summon, those are Oni from the Beyond. And if you're not familiar with the Three Kingdoms, they're actually Japan, China, and Vietnam who have sort of entered into an alliance. It started during the Black Powder War, but they also cooperated to try to kick out the guild, and now they're helping to fight off the Common invasion. So on the Common side, we have a whole bunch of mythological creatures, some of which look a little bit familiar, some of them are brand new. And on the Three Kingdoms side, it's more of a militarized army from the eastern countries, and it includes things like ninjas and samurais and all sorts of cool stuff. Now, I've already had a chance to read through the three stories that came in this book, and I think all three of them are really good. There's a little bit more of a focus on characters in these stories than some of the stuff that we've been seeing in the Malifaux stories in the last couple of years, which is something that I really like. We get a little bit of advancement of the overall plot, but to be honest, a lot of that stuff was not things that we didn't already sort of know about. And I think a lot of that comes from the fact that this book was delayed a couple years. In the Malifaux lore, we've been hearing about the invasion of the Common in the East, and in Japan in particular, for a couple of years now. And I think that's because this book was originally supposed to come out probably 2 years ago. So there's a little bit of an incongruity in the timeline, I think. But overall, we learn about a lot of what's going on with the Common and their invasion and how the Three Kingdoms are reacting. But in particular, we get introduced to all the commanders from the different factions. A lot of these characters are actually super interesting. I actually think I like the stories from this book a little bit better than I like the stories in the original TOS book. That book did have a lot of interesting characters in it, but I think I like the way that they've handled these characters a little better. They focused a little bit more on their individual personalities and some of the interactions between the different characters, and overall I really enjoyed it. I'm not going to spoil anything here, but if you haven't had a chance to read the stories, then definitely either pick up the book or hopefully in the next couple of weeks, it'll be coming out in PDF form on DriveThruRPG and you can check it out there. Otherwise, check out the affiliate link in the description and you can order it directly from Wyrd. Now, having taken a look through all of the unit cards as well as the allegiance cards and assets and stratagems and everything else in the book, there's some really interesting gameplay dynamics that are coming with these two new factions. First of all, the Common have this really interesting summoning mechanic where each of the different commanders gets a particular gate, which are the things in the lore that actually allow the Common to come over to Earthside and be able to stay here for longer than a couple of minutes. Each commander's gate gives them access to summon certain models, and they do this by actually pulling their friendly models out of glory in order to summon the new models in. So this is sort of an interesting push and pull where you can beef your models up by putting them into glory, but then you can actually nerf them slightly in order to bolster your ranks. In addition to that, there's a couple of different units in the army that interact with that in interesting ways. For example, there is actually a unit that is less powerful when it's in glory. So this is a good battery to use to suck out of glory to then pull in some summons. Now, on the Three Kingdoms side, and this is an army that I've been looking forward to for a really long time, they actually have some really unique mechanics here. They seem to all focus around sort of controlling the way that they fight and interact with enemy models. They have a lot of abilities that sort of turn off your opponent's abilities, and they can stop them from doing things like flipping to glory or modifying duels. They also seem to have a lot of ways to gain inspired tokens, and a lot of units in the army are immune to pinned and shaken tokens. All around, it seems like both armies are going to be really interesting to play, and it's going to be interesting to see the kinds of combinations that you can use by pairing them up with the other allegiances. But I know what a lot of people were most excited about with this new book, and that's the new models. And there's a whole bunch of interesting stuff in here, some of which we had seen before, and some of which we hadn't yet. And that kind of brings us to the point of this video, and it's something that I'd actually really like to get some feedback from everybody else on. So if you've been following TOS for a long time, then you know that when the original game came out, they made an effort to keep TOS separate from Malifaux. So there was a little bit of crossover in terms of the background and the lore, but none of the units and none of the characters were actually the same between TOS and Malifaux. Now that seems to have changed a little bit because when they put out the syndicates, obviously Sonya and Karai came across and became characters in TOS in the Guild and the Court of Two. And with that, we started seeing a lot of models that were cross-compatible. So everything in the Guild and Court of Two is either a model in Malifaux or is an official proxy for a model in Malifaux, in the example of Bin and Thrace. On top of all that, a couple years ago, we got the Darkest Depths box, which is an official Nightmare box for Malifaux, but is also official proxies for Gibbering Hordes in TOS. Now, I think this is a really cool thing for them to do because it gives people easy access to sort of jump in and try TOS. If you have the Guild and Quarter 2 starter box, and you bought them specifically for Malifaux, but you ever decide that you want to try TOS, then you're basically ready to go to sit down and play a one commander game, no problem. And I think if they continued that pattern, it'd be a really good way to breathe some new life into TOS. Anything they can do to bring down barriers and make it a little easier for people to give it a shot, I think that's always going to be a good thing. And that brings us to the new stuff here. So if you look through the photo dump that I put in my Discord when I was at Gen Con and first got my hands on the book, you may have noticed that one of the models for the Three Kingdoms is the Samurai. And these look just like the Samurai that we have in Ten Thunders, but they're slightly new sculpts for those models. Now, this suggests that when they release the model, it will probably be marketed with the sort of cross-compatible packaging that we've seen for some of the other stuff for Quarter 2 and Guild. Because why not? It's the same model, you might as well market it and put it out for both games. But interestingly, this is the first time that a core model for any of the primary allegiances in the other side will be cross-compatible with Malifaux. And that sort of opens the door for them to do more of that kind of stuff. We know that the syndicates have been cross-compatible so far, but why not branch out and start putting out models for the core allegiances that do double duty? So I started looking through the rest of the models in the book, and it's kind of interesting to try to think about which of these might be new models in Malifaux, or at the very least, which of them might be official proxies for different things in Malifaux. Now, the new factions are set to start releasing in September, and we've already seen them show up on the upcoming page on Wyrd's website, as well as on a couple of online stores. And unfortunately, the starter box and a handful of the early releases that we're getting for Kimon at least are not listed as being cross-compatible. We actually see some pictures of what the packaging is going to look like, and it doesn't have that sort of Malifaux and TOS branding that we've seen on some of the other stuff. So that means at the very least that not everything in these new factions is going to be cross-compatible, but there's still a whole bunch of other stuff out there, and it would be really interesting if we started seeing some of that stuff come out with the cross-compatible packaging. Now, a lot of these questions are just going to be answered as soon as we get Ashes of Malifaux released, hopefully in the next couple of months. But in the meantime, I love speculating, so let's get into it a little bit. So to start off, I'll just point out that I don't think any of the commanders from this book are going to come over as new models in Malifaux. And the reason I say that is because a commander in the other side should be roughly equivalent to a master, or maybe even a little bit more powerful than a master in Malifaux. And I really don't think we're going to see new masters coming in the new book. They've put out so many new crews and so many new keywords, as well as the titles and all this stuff. So I don't think we're going to be seeing new masters in the new Malifaux book this year. So at the very least, I think the commanders might come over as official proxies, if anything. Just to throw a couple ideas out there, Lien would probably be a good proxy for Misaki. She might make a better proxy for the Vix, but there's only one of her and there's two Vix, so I don't think that really works that well. So I think Misaki would be the best choice there. Or maybe Mei Fang, but she kind of gives me Misaki vibes for some reason. I don't know. Let me know what you think about that. Rio Edwards, I can't really think of a specific matchup that would work well for him. In the lore, he kind of reminds me a little bit of McCabe, so maybe that would work, but McCabe's got the mounted-dismounted thing going on, so maybe for McCabe's title. I can't really think of anybody else that he would work really well for, at least in terms of masters. And then Ma Zhang I think there's really only 2 or 3 mounted masters in Malifaux, so it would probably have to be somebody who's on a big enough base to fit the horse. So that is pretty much Leviticus, Riva, and McCabe. I don't think he works particularly well for any of them, but maybe we'll see something like that. And then on the Kimon side, and please excuse my pronunciation for all of these names, I'm doing my best here, but Zhang Kui, he would probably make a really good proxy for Asami. They have a very similar thing where they summon monsters from the beyond, and I think there's pretty much a one-to-one there, which I think would be pretty interesting. Takayasha, I don't think really fits any of the Malifaux masters, but she kind of reminds me of Nikima a little bit. Nikima's also on a big base. She's just like this angry monster that likes killing things, so maybe that'd be a good match. And then Shinsho is another one that I don't see a really direct comparison to any Malifaux masters. He kind of feels a little bit like Lucius to me, but I'm not sure how well that would work, but I guess that'll be my pick for now. Kawatora is a really big model. He is on a 50 mil base, though, so it's totally possible that he could be playable in Malifaux. I don't know what it would be a good proxy for. He's a big giant turtle. I think the most obvious crossover would be for the Clampets, because they are on big bases as well, and they're creatures from the bayou that are associated with the ocean. So I think that kind of fits pretty well. I think there's almost no likelihood that any of the Titans are going to come over to Malifaux because they're way too big and they tend to be on like 120 mil bases. They'd probably make the Malosaurus Rex look like the base sizing is appropriate, so let's just ignore them for now. But going through the Three Kingdoms models, I think there's a couple of things that look like they would be really good candidates to come over as new models in Malifaux. And particularly the Dragon Monks, they kind of have an interesting look and feel. a little bit similar to like a Charm Warder and a couple other things that we've seen in Ten Thunders, but I wouldn't be surprised if we saw these come over maybe in Masaki's keyword, maybe in Shenlong's keyword, maybe in both. Their mechanic on the other side is that they either have access to a super accurate but weak attack or a sort of average accuracy but powerful attack, and they have the option to use either or. So it would be interesting to see how they would translate a similar mechanic into Malifaux, and I wonder how they would tie them into the specific keywords they were going to put them in. The Dishonored are one of the models that I really like out of this book. The art's really cool looking, and I'm super excited to see what the sculpts are going to look like. But these are another unit that I think are really unique looking, and I wouldn't be surprised to see them come over into Malifaux. Even in terms of the lore, the Dishonored are sort of these people who are cast out from society for being criminals, and that works really well with Ten Thunders, so it wouldn't surprise me at all to see them crop up, maybe as a versatile to work with anybody in the faction. Or since they're kind of dark and mysterious looking, and they're also kind of outcast, then maybe it could go along with Jacob Lynch and his crew. Maybe to tie in with the whole luck mechanic, where they're the sort of bad side of luck. But I could also see them just working for Masaki and running in her keyword. The Chinese Labor Corps are a little bit too generic looking to really pick a keyword that they might be associated with, but I guess it would kind of make sense for them to work with Mei Fang. She is Chinese, and she is all about sort of her workers and laborers, but these guys have a very, like, prison labor feel to them. They don't seem like they're treated particularly well, and they're super cheap, like, horde-type models. So I'm not sure that that really works for Mei Fang, because her whole thing is that she's trying to uplift the Chinese among the Ten Thunders, and she doesn't like the fact that they're treated badly. So if they were to get added to her keyword, then they might have to put a little twist on it where they're treated a little better and maybe are a little more valuable than they are in the other side. As far as the ninjas go, I'm really excited to see them in the other side, but I don't think we're just going to get straight up ninjas in the Ten Thunders. Obviously, thematically, it would work really well, considering what ninjas are, but we already have the Torakage that sort of fill that niche, so if anything, I think the ninjas would probably come in as official proxies for the Torakage, and that would actually be really cool. That would give us a lot of variety for the models you can play for Torakage, because we have the new sculpts from 3rd edition, so I'd be really excited to see that. And I think it would be really cool to see some of these guys fight along Masaki and her crew. The Sovereign Guard are one of my favorite looking models in this whole book. They have this super interesting aesthetic with the sort of fur hats, the trident weapons, but also submachine guns on their hips that look just like MP40s. Now, I'm cool with them having modern guns because in the lore, the Vietnamese are particularly good gunsmiths, so that sort of works for me. But I'm really not sure where we would see these guys fit in Malifaux. They are from Vietnam, so maybe Ling Li knows some people from back home and could have them come over and help her out. But I don't really think they fit with the aesthetic of her crew or the mechanics. Maybe they could come over as a versatile. They are sort of known for protecting important people, so it would kind of make sense for them to work for whatever master was around. But I kind of hope they come over to Malifaux because these are really cool looking models and I'd like to see them on the table more. The Immortal Warrior is the asset for the Three Kingdoms, and this is a really cool looking model. Now, according to their lore, they are trained in using Qi, which definitely suggests that they would obviously go in the monk keyword with Shenlong. But that keyword is really big right now. I'm not sure that it needs another new model. And it would also be kind of hard to translate the assets from TOS into Malifaux because there tends to only be one sculpt of them, and that's not usually how we see at least minion level models carried over into Malifaux. Maybe this would be an enforcer. That would kind of be an interesting take on it. But it's a cool looking model, so I would definitely like to see what they would do with it in Malifaux. Now, on the Kimon side of things, it's a little bit more straightforward because pretty much every single thing in this book could be just thrown right into Asami's keyword, and it totally works, both in the fiction as well as in the look and feel, and it will tie right into her mechanics. She pretty much revolves around interacting with the Oni anyway, so it would be a one-to-one fit. Pretty much no problem. But obviously that feels a little bit boring, so let's see if there's anything in here that we think would work elsewhere. The Papa Akaname, I think, is a pretty obvious choice for going into Brewmaster's crew as well. It's a bigger version of the little Akaname that we already have, and obviously it wouldn't be too hard to translate the mechanics into just a bigger, more powerful version. The Gyuki is this really interesting looking creature. It's got a whole bunch of parts from different animals, including like a bull and a spider. And I think there's a couple of different keywords that this might work for. I think this is something that Marcus would have a really fun time with because his whole thing is sort of hybridizing and mutating animals. And in addition to that, maybe McMorning, because his thing is sort of cutting parts off of one thing and attaching it to the other. So I wouldn't be too surprised to see this come into the game with an Oni and maybe a Chimera keyword or Oni and experimental. And the last one here that I think we might see them branch out beyond Asami's keyword is the Dokebi. Just a shot in the dark on that. I have no idea how you say this word, but this is a really cool looking model, and in its lore, they talk about how it's got a connection to Earth's elements. So this is one that I think would kind of fit into pretty much any Bayou crew, But the one I would choose actually would be Sandeep, because obviously he's also got to tie in with all the elements, and I think this would be an interesting model to throw in and see him sort of buff the other elemental models in Sandeep's crew. Now, things like the Neon and the Oni Brutes we know are going to be in the starter box, and as far as we know, they're not marketed as being cross-compatible, so it might be fun to speculate about where those could fit in later on if they decided to change that, but for now it seems like they're probably not going to work for both games. When we first got our hands on this book, me and Swarmler were actually brainstorming some of these things that we might see come over to the game, and he pointed out that the Neon would actually look like really cool versions of the Void Wretches or the Void Hunters in Tara's crew in Malifaux. So shout out to Swarmlord, that's a really interesting idea. I think it would be really cool if they mix it up a little bit more. But jump in the comments below and let me know which of these models you think are going to come over to Malifaux, whether they're going to be proxies or brand new models, and what keywords you think they'd fit in the best with. Wyrd definitely has a habit of pulling from things like Through the Breach, the RPG expansion books. They get a lot of the new models for all the new Malifaux releases from the bestiary from that game. And it'll be really interesting to see if they continue to pull things from the other side as well, because I think it's a really cool way to sort of keep the games feeling like they are very closely related and to help people kind of bounce back and forth between both systems. So let me know what you think about all that, and let me know if you would be more likely to play the other side if some of your Malifaux models would actually work in that game as well, especially if you're not already playing the other side. And either way, let me know if you're excited about the other side and the two new factions. I know I personally am. I've been looking forward to both of these since the first book came out and we had that little teaser in the back, and I'm really looking forward to getting them both on the table. The other interesting thing to point out with all this is that a lot of these new models for the Kimon faction actually already have stat sheets for Through the Breach, because the Obsidian Gate Penny Dreadful actually introduced a lot of these models, and that's why we've known about them for a really long time. So it doesn't seem like it would be too hard to translate those into Malifaux models, but again, it would be really weird to just have all these new models come right over and be part of Asami's crew. Her keyword's already super big, so just tossing in another 4 or 5 new models would be kind of wild. I don't really know what other masters would be working with things from the Beyond, but the more the Kimon invade Earth, the more likely they are to interact with different people, both on Malifaux side and Earth side. And we also know that Wong has a connection to the Beyond because of the 3 Demons bag, so I would personally really like to see either some of these models come to Wong's keyword, or Wyrd, please put Wong in the other side. It would be hilarious to see him in there as a champion fighting with the Kimon for whatever reason. I'm sure they can come up with a story that would explain why that might happen, and I just want to see some Bayou lore relevance, so put him in the story, make him relevant. His story's kind of been on pause for a really long time. He hasn't really done anything significant except kind of paddle around in the Red Cage pit, and I really want to see something significant happen with the 3 Demons bag, so let's do it. Bring Wong into the story one way or the other. Maybe he pulls a Gyuki out of his bag, or a bunch of Yamabiko pop up and decide that they're going to defend Wong instead of their mountains in the Beyond. I don't know how you want to do it, but I want to see it happen. But that's all I got for you for now. I'm going to go finish painting up some of my old TOS armies to get ready for the new stuff coming in. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Check out all the important links in the description. Come hang out on the Discord. And with that, I want to send a huge thank you to the extremely cool kids tier on Patreon, the Steam Powered Scoundrels, Dogmatized, and Biclops Gladiator Games. And thanks for watching.